This is Mr. Ettinger's notes for the comparison between the two presidents of the Great Depression. We're talking about Herbert Hoover and Franklin Roosevelt. Now, when we look at these two leaders, one fundamental question that really gets raised is the notion of whose responsibility is it to address the economic problems of the country? Is it an individual's responsibility for them because they know best how to fix their struggles economically, how they're suffering, or are the problems too great and for one individual to fix, and so it should be up to the government themselves? Look for the difference between these presidents. So we start with Herbert Hoover. He was elected in 1928, a Republican and really a self-made man. I want you to know that he was raised in a two-room house into a lower income family, but he worked hard and kind of made his way to Stanford University, where he accomplished a lot and ended up kind of rising the ranks of the Republican Party as an efficient leader. And this kind of really affected the beliefs that he had and the programs that he tried to kind of lead our country in moving when he was president. You see him here at Stanford University in front of their landmark Hoover Tower. So his beliefs were that he felt the government should be limited, that he had made it as an individual. And so individuals should do that hard work on their own, believe in rugged individualism, be tough. When life is hard, tough it out and fix your own problems. So there shouldn't be direct relief from the government for the public. When we talk about our theme between what the role of the government is in the economy, he believed in a laissez-faire style and not government regulation. But as the Depression expanded when he was in office, he realized that there were some things that he should try. And so he felt that if anything, the government should be more of a facilitator. So he started the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, this program to give loans to insurance companies and banks to try to help them kind of protect their consumers. But really, it was too little and too late because as the Depression ground on, the public really turned on Hoover, felt that he and the government was not doing enough to help their struggles. They even would name their shantytown villages in kind of his honor, calling them Hoovervilles. Or if people would be sleeping on a park bench under some newspapers, they would mockingly call the newspapers Hoover blankets. But the straw that really kind of broke the camel's back here was an event in 1932, an election year, where some World War I veterans were asking for a bonus that they had been promised. So they were supposed to get a bonus in 1945 of $500, by the time they would be older and ready to retire. And they said, we don't need that in the future. We need that today in 1932 when we're struggling. So these veterans of World War I came throughout the country. They marched to Washington, D.C. to ask Congress and the president for their bonus to get it early. And they voted on it, and the government turned them down and said that no bonus would be given and encouraged the people to leave town. But when some of the protesters stayed, Hoover made the decision to turn the current army onto these protesters and sort of tear down their encampment and put tear gas on these protesters, which was really seen as a cold and heartless move that kind of finally turned the country against Hoover completely. So in the election of that fall, Hoover didn't have a chance, and he lost in a landslide to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a very different leader. Roosevelt was a Democrat. He was born into wealth. He was from New York and raised wealthy, had served in various political positions, was the governor of New York State and so on. And so when he came to the White House, he had a very different perspective. I want to tell you just some about his nature. One is he was optimistic. He really felt that America's best days were ahead of us. And so it seems like in every picture, he was smiling, that he had confidence that America would weather the storm. He had a notable wife named Eleanor. She was a political leader in her own regard and had her own ambitions. After World War II, she was the leader of the U.S. representation, the delegation to the United Nations. And finally, he had a a disability. He contracted polio as an adult and became paralyzed from the waist down, so he was unable to walk on his own power. And he spent much of his presidency in a wheelchair. But this was generally hidden from the public. This is the only picture ever taken of him in his wheelchair. And so the public was not reminded of this. Many of them knew, but they weren't reminded of his disability, which makes me think if a president with a disability would be elected today. So once in office, Roosevelt was a master communicator. He was able to use the new technology of the radio to give fireside chats to reassure the public. And there's an important one about banking, which we're going to be looking at this week. Another thing about Roosevelt is his political philosophy. I have two pictures here that kind of connect back to our government and the economy theme of what role should the government play in the economy. And on the left side, we get a picture demonstrating the idea of a small government, and on the right, a big government. So the philosophy is, if you believe in small government, that the government should not have many programs or solutions to solve to fix the crisis. There shouldn't be regulations telling businesses how much to pay people or how to act, that really people should be fixing their own problems. Whereas in terms of big government, a big government solution that Roosevelt supported says there should be many programs, lots of solutions to try to fix the depression, lots of regulations that businesses would have to follow through, because government is the solution to the problem. And so it should be looked on to fix things. We had Hoover with the small government, Roosevelt with a philosophy of the big. And Roosevelt's big government was exemplified in his program called the New Deal. These are these laws that he encouraged Congress to pass during his honeymoon at the beginning of his term in office, but all are known by their initials. So we call them the alphabet agencies. And they fall into three categories, which I'll start with the letter R. So I'm going to talk about these three R's. We're going to close with this and give you a metaphor for them that kind of about how to solve a crisis. Because one time I saw a car crash, or a car hit a pedestrian on the corner of Victor and Spencer Street. And when we see that, when the car hit the walker, the first thing you need to do is stop the bleeding. Someone had to call 911 and get an ambulance there. When there's a crisis, you need immediate relief. So in the Depression, this would be cash assistance programs that would give people money to make it through the year. Government programs that are going to rescue those who are suffering. But once the people are back on their feet, then they need recovery. And so the student who was hit by the car, that after she was out of the hospital, she needs to go to physical therapy. She needs to kind of learn how to regain the use of her body and learn how to walk again. So these are programs to get the economy moving again, to get the economy back on its feet. And these would be lots of programs that would create jobs, get folks back to work so that they could spend money and move the cycle forward. Now, all of that would be in vain if another depression could come along and ruin the system. So you have to have the third R, which is reform. We want to prevent the problem from returning. So a reform in the case of the car accident would be to get rid of the stop sign and put in an actual traffic signal at that intersection to make sure that no accidents would ever happen there again. So these would be programs that would change the economy, to change the whole system so that we would never have another depression. And in many ways, they succeeded, because from the late 30s up until 2008, we had a period of 70 years where we did not experience an economic downturn. Those are the three R's. And that concludes the summary of Roosevelt and Hoover.